It was a crisp autumn evening, and the grand concert hall buzzed with anticipation. Glittering chandeliers bathed the crowd in golden light as guests took their seats, eager to witness the brilliance of a world-renowned pianist, Maestro Lucien Devereaux. Among the audience sat a humble woman named Clara, dressed modestly in a plain blouse and skirt. She wasn't there to chase fame or marvel at celebrity. Music was her quiet companion, a passion she'd nurtured alone in the shadows of ordinary life. During the intermission, Maestro Lucien walked through the lobby, graciously greeting fans. His entourage encouraged a bit of light-hearted fun. Someone jokingly suggested he invite an audience member on stage. With a mischievous smile, Lucien turned to Clara and quipped, "Shall we hear you play, madam?" Giggles bubbled among the crowd. Clara hesitated, blinking in disbelief. The idea was absurd, wasn't it? But then she gave a small, trembling nod, and that's when everything began to change. Clara's heart pounded like a drum as she was gently escorted toward the stage. The once distant spotlight now burned directly above her, illuminating every uncertain footstep. Whispers coursed through the audience. Some chuckled softly, expecting a harmless joke. Others leaned forward, curious to see what this quiet woman might do with Maestro Lucien's grand piano. Lucien himself looked amused, sitting off to the side with arms crossed, waiting for the comedic moment to play out. Clara reached the piano bench, her fingers trembling slightly as she sat. For a moment, she just stared at the keys as if greeting old friends she hadn't seen in years. Then, she took a slow breath and gently placed her hands on the keyboard. The first note Clara played rang out like a whisper through the hall, soft, unsure, yet strikingly delicate. Her hands glided across the keys with surprising ease, as if reconnecting with a part of herself long buried beneath daily routines and forgotten dreams. The playful smirks in the audience began to fade. She wasn't fumbling or stalling. Her fingers danced across the piano in a way that spoke of deep emotion, quiet strength, and untold stories. Each chord bloomed with beauty, pulling the room into stillness. Maestro Lucien's smile faltered, his eyes narrowed, disbelief creeping across his face. People leaned in, captivated. This wasn't a joke. This was something remarkable. As Clara continued to play, her music shifted into something even more profound. She wasn't just performing, she was revealing pieces of her soul. The gentle cascade of notes told a story of heartbreak, hope, and resilience. It was as if the piano was speaking for her, relaying years of emotion in a language beyond words. In the audience, jaws slowly dropped. People who had come for entertainment now found themselves stirred to silence. The room, once buzzing with chatter, was now frozen, mesmerized by the woman on stage. Lucien sat forward, eyes fixed on Clara's hands. Every note she played contradicted the assumptions he and others had made. This wasn't chance. This was mastery. Behind the curtain of her modest life, Clara had clearly lived a musical journey no one had noticed until now. Lucien, the maestro known for commanding audiences with his brilliance, now sat stunned. His face was no longer playful or proud, it softened into quiet awe. The woman he'd invited as a joke was playing with a depth and authenticity he hadn't felt in years. It was as if Clara's fingers were painting emotions onto the canvas of silence. Her phrasing, dynamics, and touch reflected the soul of someone who had lived every note. Lucien slowly rose from his seat, moving closer to the stage. Something inside him shifted, not just admiration, but humility. He realized he wasn't witnessing talent. He was witnessing greatness, wrapped in simplicity. Even the ushers stood motionless, watching this unexpected symphony unfold. Clara played on, unaware of the revolution she'd ignited in that room. Clara's playing reached a crescendo, just in volume, but in emotion. Her hands flowed effortlessly, translating sorrow, joy, and yearning into melody. Each note seemed to echo through people's hearts. drawing tears from eyes that hadn't expected to cry tonight. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wrap around them like a memory. Couples clutched hands. Older guests recalled loves lost and dreams paused. Even the youngest audience members seemed hypnotized, sensing something special was unfolding, something rare. Lucien stood still, gazing at Clara with reverence. It was as though the piano had found its true voice again, not through fame, but through feeling. And Clara, she remained composed, as if the music wasn't for applause, but for healing. As Clara played her final note, it lingered in the air, like a delicate sigh, fluttering into silence. Then, for a moment, nothing. No clapping, no cheering, just awe. And then a single person stood and began to applaud. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire concert hall erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Cheers, whistles, and clapping filled the space, echoing louder than any encore maestro Lucien had ever received. Clara stood, surprised and overwhelmed, blinking back tears. She hadn't expected applause. She hadn't even expected to play, but somehow, in sharing her soul through music, she had turned an audience into believers. Lucien approached her slowly, then bowed deeply and respectfully. The crowd gasped at his gesture. The maestro had humbled himself before a woman unknown to the world, yet known so deeply to the music. After the performance, Lucien invited Clara to sit beside him in front of the audience. Microphones were lowered, cameras clicked, but Clara didn't speak of fame or ambition. She spoke of solitude, practice, and passion. "I never had formal training," she said softly, "just an old piano, and a lot of quiet nights." The room hung on her every word. Clara shared how she had once dreamed of being a pianist, but life, responsibility, and silence had taken over. Music had become her private refuge, not something she ever imagined sharing. Lucien, now seated beside her, looked humbled. "Tonight, the piano didn't just speak, it remembered," he said, "and you were its memory." The crowd cheered again, not just for the music, but for Clara herself, the woman who had turned a joke into a revelation. In the days following Clara's unforgettable performance, media outlets raced to cover the story. Headlines buzzed with phrases like "From Silence to Symphony" and "Clara's Awakening." Interview requests poured in, but Clara remained grounded, choosing only one sit-down with the very man who had first invited her to the stage, Lucien. Their conversation was intimate and powerful. Lucien admitted, "I thought I was playing a joke, but you showed me what music truly means." Clara smiled gently. "Music isn't about status or stage lights. It's about truth." The interview went viral. Suddenly, thousands of hidden artists, elderly pianists, young dreamers, self-taught musicians began sharing videos, stories, and music. Clara had unknowingly sparked a global movement celebrating raw, unpolished talent. What began as a single moment in a concert hall transformed Clara into a global symbol of hidden brilliance. She wasn't chasing recognition, but recognition came to her in letters, flowers, emails, and messages from all corners of the world. Young musicians posted videos saying, "Clara gave me courage." Elderly players dusted off their forgotten instruments. Music schools began reevaluating how they measure talent, no longer focusing just on technique, but emotion and authenticity. Yet through all of it, Clara stayed humble. She declined sponsorship deals and refused television drama. Her goal wasn't fame, it was simply to remind people that music belongs to everyone, not just the elite or celebrated. Lucien often said afterward, "Clara changed music for me, and for countless others." She reminded us of its soul. Months later, Clara received a gilded letter and invitation to perform at the Royal Conservatory Gala, a prestigious event attended by world leaders, legendary artists, and musical elites. It was an honor reserved for the few deemed the future of music. She hesitated, Clara had never wanted to be the center of attention. But after reading hundreds of heartfelt messages from people inspired by her story, she realized this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever felt unheard or unseen. And so, she accepted. The night of the gala, she walked onto the stage. No diamonds, no dramatic entrance. Just Clara and her piano. She performed not for fame, but for truth. And once again, the world listened in silence, mesmerized, as Clara's final note floated into the grandeur of the Royal Conservatory. The audience didn't clap immediately. They breathed, as though they'd all been holding it in. Then, from the silence, came a slow, rising wave of applause. A standing ovation once again, but this time from dignitaries, legends, and maestros who had heard everything, but never this. Some wiped tears, others bowed their heads. Clara had not played to impress. She had played to express, and in doing so, reminded every person in that grand hall of something deeply human. Later that evening, Lucian stood beside her backstage. "You've done it again," he whispered. "You've reminded music of its soul." Clara smiled, quietly. She wasn't chasing the echo, she was the echo. After the gala, Clara returned to her quiet life, content, fulfilled, and still devoted to her modest routines. But one morning, an envelope arrived bearing the seal of a legendary institution, the Conservatory of Paris, where some of the greatest musicians in history had once studied. Inside was a handwritten letter. It wasn't just a congratulation, it was an invitation. "Clara," it read, "we believe your story and gift must be shared with those learning music, not just as skill, but as life. We humbly invite you to become our guest lecturer." Clara was stunned. The idea of teaching at one of the world's most revered music schools had never crossed her mind. But after thoughtful reflection, she smiled. Her journey had begun in silence. Now, she was being asked to speak. Clara arrived at the Conservatory of Paris, not as a student, but as a teacher, a bearer of wisdom, earned through silence and self-discovery. Her first lecture wasn't about technique or theory. It was about the soul of music. She told her students, "Don't just play notes, let them play you." Young musicians, many accustomed to rigid structure, were moved by her simplicity and sincerity. Clara emphasized feeling over perfection, truth over applause. Her presence in the conservatory began to shift the very culture of music education, making space for vulnerability, emotion, and individuality. She didn't just teach piano, she taught liberation. Her sessions became legendary not for virtuosity, but for their honesty. Students began composing not just for exams, but for meaning. Years passed, and Clara continued teaching not just in Paris, but through workshops around the world. She never released albums, never branded herself, yet wherever she went, her name carried gravity. Not because of fame, but because of what she represented. She became a symbol for every overlooked talent, every dreamer who practiced in silence, every soul that believed emotion could trump applause. One evening, long after her first performance, Clara visited the same concert hall where it all began. It was empty now, dimly lit and peaceful. She sat at the piano once again, touched the keys, and played, quietly. No crowd, no cameras, just music, and a woman who had changed the world by simply being true to herself.